Hello, here we go with our review of biological psychology. We're going to go through the toughest terms here and we'll see how fast we can get through this. Here we go. Number one thing that's very confusing, I think, is afferent and efferent neurons. Um, Afferent neurons, the way or one of the ways I try to remember it is you can think of A comes before E, so A is going to come first. And normally, this doesn't work all the time, but normally you get a sense, right? One of your five senses, touch, taste, smell, whatever, and they got to go into your body first. So afferent neurons send signals towards your brain, and efferent neurons, E comes after A, sends signals away from your brain. Okay, so afferent comes first because A comes before E. So afferent, the first thing that you have to get a sense into your brain before your brain can respond to that sense. Maybe that way will help you remember it. Next is the nervous system map. Like I mentioned before, you should really be able to map this out in your sleep. So the first thing we've got here is your nervous system is divided into two. Your central nervous system, which is composed of the brain and the spinal cord, right? And then you've got the peripheral nervous system, which is composed of everything else, peripheral, right, around. So central, right, center, right in the center of your body. Peripheral nervous system is then further divided into your somatic nervous system and your autonomic nervous system. Automatic. So somatic is voluntary muscular movement. All right, so this is voluntary muscular movement, right? So my hand going like this is voluntary. My brain's sending a signal. It's actually, you put the word skeletal in front of this, actually. Skeletal muscular movement. And that's your somatic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system is everything that you can't control. It just happens automatically. And that gets divided one more time into your sympathetic and then your parasympathetic. Down in sympathetic, right, is that fight or flight. This is your arousal. It gets things fired up, get your adrenal glands releasing that epinephrine and norepinephrine, get your heart rate beating faster, etc. When you see that bear, your sympathetic nervous system kicks into action. Your parasympathetic is that calms things back down, right? And again, this stuff happens automatically, autonomic. So somatic does the other thing. It doesn't happen automatically, right? I don't just move my fingers like this in front of my face automatically. It takes voluntary. So your brain stem, some brain parts. Let's go through real important here. Brainstem parts, the ones you really want to know, right, are the cerebellum, and then we'll look for them over here. Your pons, your reticular formation, and your medulla. Those are the big ones that we need to know in your brainstem. So right here is your pons. It's the big thing, right? Pons, literally Latin means bridge. So it's communicating between the cerebrum, which is this part up here. All this part up here is the cerebrum, and then the rest of your body down here. So it bridges between those two. That's the pons. It's the bridge. Your cerebellum is this gray part back here, right? Your cerebellum is coordinated movements, fine movements, balance. Remember, everything down here in the brainstem is your oldest part of your brain, and almost all mammals have this. So it's like your most evolutionary old part of your brain. It's the most basic part of your brain. Oops, I made those go away. Your medulla, right, is really concentrating on your autonomic functions, your heartbeat, your breathing, all that stuff that we just talked about in the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. Your medulla is helping control that. And then finally, your reticular formation. That's actually, you don't really see it on here, but it's kind of this right in here. And your reticular formation is your arousal. Are you paying attention? It's helping folks with that, right? So here's your medulla. Pons is right above that. Your reticular formation's in here, and then your cerebellum's back here. Okay, great. Now your limbic system is part of your midbrain is in here. So your limbic system's emotions, right? Limbic system's a lot of your emotions. So right in here, your thalamus, he's super important. Your thalamus, right, is the inner, literally means inner room, thalamus. That means inner room. That's the relay center. Is responsible for a lot of, relaying sensory information to other parts of your brain. You got the hypothalamus, right? And hypo means below, so hypothalamus is right down here. Right, your hypothalamus is right down there. Your hypothalamus is the 4 F's, right? The 4 F's: fight, flight, food, and sex, right? That's what hypothalamus is responsible for. We've also got our, right over here, this guy right here is your pituitary gland, right? That's the master gland responsible for growth. It also tells the other glands, other hormones when to start releasing in the rest of your body. And then we've also got your hippocampus, which I don't think you can see too well on here, but your hippocampus kind of wraps around right here, wraps around on the side right here, and that's your memory, right? That's memory center. At the very end of your hippocampus, or your hippocampus, yeah, your hippocampus is the amygdala, and your amygdala is your emotions responsible for survival, so a lot of fear, a lot of arousal, pleasure, and it also helps tell us where our memories are going to be stored. And the way that scientists think that, right, is because based on the emotions that are associated with those memories, will tell it what part of the brain to go to. On this little picture that I found on the internet here, the auditory cortex, which we talked about earlier, is right here. This is the side of your brain, right? So this is your ear. Right over here, your visual cortex is back here. Right up here is your motor cortex, right? This is the frontal lobe of your brain right here, frontal lobe. And then your somatosensory cortex is right behind it back here. All right, since I got the lobes on here, let's just finish this off. You got your other lobes, your visual, or I'm sorry, your sorry about that, your occipital lobe back here, your parietal lobe up here, and then your temporal lobe right over here, and then this whole big part's your frontal lobe. So frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobes, like that. All right, Broca's and Wernicke's area, I'm going to go back here to the side of the brain. Broca's area is responsible for speech, actually saying the speech. It's in the frontal lobe, and Wernicke's area is responsible for speech comprehension. So if we look here, right, Broca's area is going to be right about here or so, and Wernicke's area is going to be right about here or so, right? Wernicke's area is in the temporal lobe over here, and Broca's area is in the frontal lobe over here. Okay, so what else do you remember is in the frontal lobe is your motor cortex is up here in your frontal lobe. Okay, so motor cortex and Wernicke's area, right? Motor makes your mouth speak, so it's actual speaking. Temporal lobe has to do with the comprehension, and that's right next to your auditory cortex, which is right here. Okay. And then aphasia is a problem with either speaking or comprehending speech. And so aphasia is when we forget. So we forget either how to speak or how to comprehend speech. All right, so you might have you could have Broca's aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia, and so some of it might just be like syllable of blood, that might be Broca's aphasia, and Wernicke's aphasia might be cat, dog, mom ate tuna, house I love, the dog, and so it doesn't make any sense. All right, then last two quick things. Evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology really looks at two things. Number one, not how does it help us survive? So not die. How does it help us not die? And number two, how does it help us reproduce? So all of our behaviors, our emotions, everything we got, evolutionary psychology is asking us, how does that behavior help us survive, not die, and how does it help us reproduce? And then a mutation occurs in evolution when one gene mutates. So you have an E, maybe it mutates into a G, and then this G, and what becomes important, mutations become important when this G either can affect the thing negatively, but if it turns out to be a trait that is a positive trait that can be more helpful, and then this person or this animal or whatever who has this trait then reproduces, and maybe his offspring has this trait, and this more advantageous trait can then start reproducing more and more and more because they die less, right? Or they reproduce more, right? Because that's what evolutionary psychology is looking at. How do you survive and how do you reproduce? So those are the toughest terms, I think, for for biological psychology. And thanks.